Champions bandwagon. Yes!
Hello and welcome back to the Full 40 with Willie, Trevor, and retired but never retired, always coming back, Chris. How we doing, fellas?
It's search season.
It is search season. It's that time. It is that time of year. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need to belabor anything. On Saturday at, I think it was probably like 11 a.m. Eastern time, the Villanovan, as first reported that Kyle Neptune is no longer the head coach of Villanova University men's basketball team. And now we are in search season. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'll go really quick. This is obviously going to be an episode about who's replacing Kyle and where we think the school is heading going forward. But just quickly wanted to say, like, obviously things didn't work out. The school was in a tricky situation 3 years ago when the Hall of Fame, guy you figured would be retiring at Villanova at, closer to 80 than it was closer to 65 steps away. And you're in a scramble to get somebody. You get one of his two assistants from his most successful era, and things just didn't work out, obviously. Thank you to Kyle for everything. Obviously still part of the family. And as we've seen other former players say, he was key to the success, the recruiting, the scheming, everything over the most, glorious time in Villanova basketball's history. So just wanted to reiterate that. And now we can, unfortunately things didn't work out, but now we turn the page and are looking for a new head coach.
Agreed with everything said. As far as I'm concerned, the Neptune era is behind us. So I want to move forward a little and talk what's to come. Yeah. I think we got a great guest for that tonight.
Yep. So in terms of speaking what's to come, there is nobody else better in the industry at gathering what's going on, getting the scuttlebutt and talking about search season, pulling on none other than Curry Hicks Sage. Curry, how you doing, man?
Tired, man. Great to be here. Tired. This time of year has become like a second job, and I never knew it would get here, but I have learned entirely too much about Villanova, and I can finally put it to use tonight, I suppose, as we enter the halcyon days of Wildcat search season.
So for those who aren't like chronically online like we are, just a real quick
for the sane among us.
That's right. Real quick background, Curry. You could add details as needed, but I'll give my version that I've heard from the spaces. Curry hosts Twitter Spaces going back, I want to say 4 years.
Yeah, this is the fourth cycle of search season, but in some ways the third. But it started in 2022.
Yeah, related to Curry's a long time UMass fan. Grew up with the Calipari teams at UMass. And just loves ball in general and loves UMass hoops. And when they hired Frank Martin a few years back, Curry was all over that, kind of turned into like, hey, what about this guy? What about this job, etc. And since then, it's been like a rocket ship, and he has become pretty much like the Trilly Donovan of the coaching search world. Except Trilly's kind of more on the Discord and on Twitter. And Curry, you're on Twitter a lot, obviously, but it's really the spaces, the live shows that you do. In fact, I believe we're the only thing standing in between you and hosting another one tonight.
Mercifully, yes. I think that's probably the case. Well, that was quite an introduction. Thanks, Chris. It started to be a little less generous as kind of a bit, almost a cyberbullying play toward the athletic director, because I didn't go to UMass. I grew up next to it, and I just, wanted them to be good again. Didn't work in basketball, and just kind of, had this burner and was having this. Curry's not my real name. So it's a play on Curry Hicks Cage, which is where Dr. J played at UMass, kind of an old bandbox of an arena gym, really. And it started as kind of a bit to just chronicle, everything in real time that was going on with the UMass search 3 years ago, when there was, a desire for us to get good again. And then through that, I kind of realized that a lot of the listeners were just people in basketball tracking the carousel. I had always known some people in basketball enough to sort of make my way around a bit. But then I realized a lot of the listeners were coaches and people in the industry. And I started making more and more connections. And people were like, you should do this for the whole country. And so the next year, search season sort of took off nationally. And then now we're on the 4th year, but really the 3rd of the whole country. So it's sort of become more than I bargained for, but I do love it. It's been a lot of fun. And now I'm just, I like people. I like to connect to people of all different places. I find searches endlessly fascinating. And I find this one as fascinating as any. So I've just been obsessively learning about it. I apologize as I'm making a little popcorn here. I do that often on my show.
It's part of the show.
Yeah,
it's part of the deal.
It just became, it really did start as, now people like take it so much more seriously, like stop with the popcorn. And I was like, no, it really just was me like catching
Just
up.
living my life,
dinner.
man.
Say it again.
I said, just living my life. Like, you guys are the ones listening to me. I'm going to keep on with my day.
Like, I'm not in a studio, like until it becomes my full-time job. I mean, we do make a little money now, but anyway, so yeah, that's the deal. Pretty much Chris nailed it. And Nova, I think the nice thing from a understanding search season angle is that we've kind of known this was coming for a while. Yep. So this was one that I feel, a lot of times you're trying to catch up really quickly on a search that opens unexpectedly, but this one, I think I've had the broad contours and for a while, and Chris has given me a lay of the land of the place over the years, and then just different contacts and people in basketball to fill in, and Philly and whatever to fill in the rest. So let's go.
So I guess at this point, let's get into it. At this point, like, what's the state of play as you understand it in terms of who Nova is looking at, who is interested in Nova, and what kind of competition is out there for the hires that Nova wants to make?
I think there is a bigger pool of candidates than maybe we are appreciative of, and that this could be a little bit longer than for different reasons than some searches are. The median, I mean, like the UMass one a couple years back was probably lasted like 26 days, something like that, 24 days. Sometimes they're 48 hours, right? So there's really a huge range, but this one I feel like will be somewhere in the middle. Some of that may be because the candidates they're targeting most are still playing. Some of that may be because I think they really want to get this right. And the landscape is such that the way in which like a coach was hired, I think 5 years ago in the pre-portal era is very different than now. And so like I think they are using this as an opportunity to just take stock of all of this. And given the way it went down 3 years ago and kind of, late in the cycle, it was like, what was it? Late April, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. April 20th.
Yeah. I think they're not going to rush it. And I think that, it's going to be in kind of Nova fashion. I suspect they're going for probably, a lot of this, but I bet you they're going to go for someone who will be there for who they intend to be there for a long time. So that could come from a number of places. You want to just talk names?
Sure.
Yeah, we can throw some out.
So first, I think today a lot of stuff started leaking weirdly. Adam Zagoria had that thing, and I think he said, like, all of a sudden you started hearing Mick Cronin, Porter Mosier, at least I did, Mick Cronin, Porter Moser, and who was the other one that we like sort of hadn't heard much of?
There was over the weekend was the whole Kevin Willard.
Yeah, right. And I don't know how intentional that is. I don't want to get conspiratorial, but obviously there's an element of, they're sort of teasing things out, maybe to throw you off the scent of who's most likely.
I hope
There's I think that Ryan Odom is a candidate they would want. There's been a lot of rumors that he's already locked in at Virginia, but other people have told me he's very intrigued by Nova. So I wouldn't, I'm not saying that's out of the picture entirely. We don't really know where he's going to go until his team at VCU is knocked out. So I think it's fair to say he's a candidate that would intrigue them, and that he's not unintrigued by Nova. Occam's razor, or whatever it is, simplest explanation is usually the right one, which has always led me to believe that UVA is the place. But this thing comes with surprises every year. And, because he was a ball boy at UVA, his dad coached at UVA. He's been in Virginia. He's already in Virginia right now. There's a lot that kind of just checks those boxes. But, other people have told me he really values being at a place that's a primarily basketball school. So wouldn't shock me. The Porter Moser thing I learned first from a source last night, guy who's almost never wrong. And then I tracked it down a little from some others today. And it does sound like, at least at one point, more like 7 to 10 days ago, that was a name that intrigued Jay. The extent to which Jay himself is involved there, I honestly don't know. Like, I'm sure he cares, right? But I don't know if, he's in the studio right now. I don't know that he's on the phone. Like, I get the sense ultimately that it is Rodol's hire, right? Obviously, you have to defer to an extent to Jay, but I don't get the sense that he's putting his thumb on the scale fully and making the call here. But again, you guys might know more on that front than me. And I do think that his Porter push or intrigue, whatever you want to call it, I think probably is real, because I've heard it from now a couple people who I really, really trust. And like in this, there are people who are just hitting my DMs relentlessly and are burners, and I have no, and sometimes they're right, but I don't always, when I say that it's two people I trust, it's really, really trust. So, what's interesting is that, I did a poll just to see where people's heads are at nationally on this. And also Mick Cronin's name has been bandied about a little bit. His buyout is really, really high at UCLA. And unless it was waived, I have a hard time seeing that, but stranger things have happened. The candidate, and then you hear a lot about Chris Collins and Richard Pitino. Now, I don't have any indication that those two have been contacted per se. And they're not ones that were, I don't believe they were thrown out in that Zagoria one, who did Zagoria cite?
It was Cronin. Who else?
Cronin, he like mentioned Kevin Willard, I think, but again, that was like a 2-hour thing, and then that extension came through.
Which, by the way, may have just been a ploy for him to get.
Oh, absolutely. I think it was the whole time. I don't think it. I laugh about it, but for me to think to hire, it's like the same way when people say, "Oh, we should have hired Chris Mack." It's like you think about coaches that Jay Wright destroyed for years in the Big East, and it's like, yeah, we're not giving him the keys to the car now. But I know Willard's grown and everything, but I'm just trying to stall while I pull up the article.
But the point is, if it's Zagoria on that, I suspect it came from. And again, like, you have to be careful about this because you never know. But I just suspect that probably came from Nova. If you do a Twitter search and do Adam Zagoria Villanova over the years, you can probably determine where some of those things came. And that's part of the reason some of the sleuthing and kind of almost like true crimey element of this is probably what keeps me so like inexplicably obsessed with it all. But I just felt like those names were probably came from Nova, and it's very easy to leak sort of not all that factual stuff that's still not a lie, right? Because you can be like, we're looking at these three, and they could be looking at 30,
Yeah, so he obviously the big name in the headline is Cronin, but then he does talk about Chris Collins is the next named, and then Mitch Henderson and Patino and Ryan Odom. But again, his sources say Cronin and Collins are the two leading contenders.
Yeah. So here's my thing about the Cronin thing. Doesn't make sense because of the money. Maybe they waive his buyout, then it does make sense. Okay. Let's see what he does. This is also why the tournament is so fascinating, why I call it search season, because if Mick Cronin wins 2 games again this weekend, all of a sudden it's like, could Mick go to Indiana or, whatever? Like it just, there's a way in which the facts on the ground can alter all this very quickly. But as I started going deeper, I started wondering, and you guys probably have more insight than I do, and, talking to a lot of people around there and around Philly basketball and whatever. Mark Jackson is the AD at Northwestern. Mark Jackson was the guy who was sort of tapped to officially make the hire of Neptune. The extent to which he himself actually had control over that, I think, is dubious. He's now at Northwestern, and I presume he has I don't know the relationship he has with Nova, but Nova is a place that's small, that there is a kind of a familial, all in the family element.
His son still goes there, yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that, right? And
yeah.
So them poaching Collins from him after he left them to go to Collins, like I would have no problem with it. And frankly, I think he's the best name that I've heard thrown around, not by an overwhelming margin, but on balance with the names I've heard, I think Odom may be a little sexier but I think Odom's done it at much easier places to win. So you can quibble with which one is, between, and they're all fine, right? They're all adequate, competent, whatever. I just don't know if that factors in at all. But some people I've spoken to sort of suggest that could be. And I think we often, it's one of the reasons I like this topic so much. There are a lot of the kind of unspoken human elements to these things that I think even if the individuals involved don't acknowledge forthrightly, exist nonetheless, right? And there's just a kind of human psychology piece to this all, and an industry thing, and it's a fairly small insular system. And so the way fans look at it, I think often is very different than the way the highest level industry professionals look at stuff like this. And so that's a dynamic that I just feel like looms in with respect to Collins. Frankly, there's probably similar dynamics with respect to other candidates, but I haven't gone that deep yet, but the Jackson was there and now is there is hard to ignore.
Right.
Yep. Makes sense. So I guess speaking of competition, right? I think just talking out loud, Odom has been rumored with UVA. You talked about that at length, as well as NC State, although I feel like that came out hot at the gate for NC State and since cooled off. And that's the other, the other interplay of coach season search season that I find fascinating is I think individual fans who just pay attention to their school think that their school can operate in this bubble of okay, I'm just going to evaluate and make a hire, when in reality there's a list of names who are theoretically up for a potential change, and there's a handful of schools who are also in their own search season. So you mentioned a few. Virginia, which is won a national championship in the last several years. You have NC State, who made last year's Final Four, and you have Indiana, who, while their fans and people would still want to consider them a blue blood, even without recent success, has been still a massive basketball institution to this day. And that's not to mention others, right? So
Texas could open in coming days. I mean, there's a bunch. Yes.
Right. And then anytime someone makes a move, if Mick Cronin does move, let's just say he wins 3 games and goes to Indiana, right? Then UCLA's open, right? Yep. So it's kind of this constant jockeying. And so these ADs are all trying to move and make hires, but yet they have to compete with who else is out there.
Not only that, but oftentimes it's the same small cadre of search firms and agents who are in the middle of all of this and who are helping their clients conceivably leverage the opening at one place to get another, to get a raise here, to stay where they're at. So, yeah, it does not exist in a vacuum. And I had speculated at one point last week that Odom was sort of holding up the whole carousel. I didn't say that negatively, by the way. I'm just saying once we knew, because we knew he was, we never know anything, but we had reliable intel in suggesting that, excuse me, he was kind of been, when you're at VCU and you win 27 games, you just are kind of, it's always been that way with Shaka and Anthony Grant and, everybody else, Will Wade. It's where you just kind of like assumed to be in the mix for everything. How true that is, sometimes hard to say, but yeah, he was in the mix. We knew he was in the mix firmly at Virginia. There was going to be, Nova was going to open. So that was a possibility. And NC State, has a lot of family ties between like basically the AD's father and his father, So if he had just picked, let's say, and it leaked and we knew, then it would give us a little bit of a way of winnowing out some other candidates and kind of narrowing the field. But we don't know yet. And I think that's why this weekend's games are also really interesting, and the timing, because once these guys lose, now it's weird because Collins is done, his season is over. So if Nova was just like, well, Collins is our guy, he's our number one, whatever, you kind of wonder why it's not announced tomorrow, right? Which is kind of one of the reasons why I think maybe Collins isn't as deep in there, and why I threw out the Jackson thing as a possible reason. Could be any number of things that I'm missing too, just to be clear. And if you go into this thinking you know it all, you're wrong outright. But I just think, like, if it was him, wouldn't it have been trending that way really fast?
Yeah, that the logic's there. That makes sense.
Be here and ready for the crown.
The portal, the portal opens up next week, right? So like it's a week and a half, whatever it is. I forget exactly, but like, the portal's opening soon. So in theory, you'd want to install a head coach as soon as possible so they can build up their staff and start hitting the portal. And Nova is not going to be an exception. There is I think we have a handful of guys who can reliably fill out the bench, but Nova is not returning, and who knows what they might do, but like Nova's not returning any starters.
Yeah. And there's a sense, I think, around the kind of college basketball insider landscape that it may be a bit of a harder rebuild than perhaps some anticipated. That there's going to be, you could have, I don't know, 9-10 new guys next year. And I think probably figuring out exactly what the NIL spend is and what that looks like. This is not just like, a plug and play sort of deal. And I even think figuring out, the interplay between Baker Dunleavy, who's very well regarded in the role of GM, but it's always tricky when you work for someone new, or who works for who and all that stuff. Just, getting that all on the same page and kind of the mechanics of it all, and just kind of, paving the way and creating relatively smooth conditions for the next candidate. Like, that's going to take a little bit of time. And I think Nova is loath to rush. I think that's probably smart. I think better to wait to get your guy. But the only reason I say the thing about Collins is, like, if that was clearly your guy, then you theoretically could have been done.
Yep. Yeah. You made a good point with roster makeup as well. Like, this isn't the search of, obviously it was less of a search 4 years ago or 3 years ago when Jay left, but that situation, we had a full roster. And obviously we have to make efforts to keep the players on the roster, but there was defined, these are the players, these are coming back, this is the freshman class. There was a team to keep together. And now we're looking at a situation where, like, to your point, it's a really good call out of coaches not really knowing what the roster makeup is going to be. And it could be a tougher season next year, depending on how things fill out. I had one question for a name that I've seen thrown out just by people on Twitter. Didn't know if you've heard anything. He still has time to play because he's in the tournament. But Mark Byington over at Vanderbilt, have you heard anything in that realm?
So I had always sort of heard that one like way back as just a logical good name because he's an outstanding coach and he's one of the. I've also my understanding is he got his job endowed. It became like an endowed chairmanship this year. They did a whole thing. There's a whole commitment at Vanderbilt to basketball now where there wasn't before. So that's become a substantially better job than it was a year ago. And the signs pointed to contentment. Now, having said that, sometimes the very best searches are when no one sees the name coming, and there's so much smoke out there around, and so much noise around all these other candidates that you miss the signal, so to speak, of who it actually is. And so if it were Byington, that would be a really impressive job by all parties. You could say the same about a number of candidates, but he's really, really good. I just haven't heard rumblings at all about him in the mix there. There's certain candidates I feel like I'm I could get stuff on quicker through, one way or the other. Byington, was kind of doing his thing in James Madison forever. I have some Vandy sources who say he's happy, but I'm not close enough to that situation to really speak on it.
Yeah, fair. No, that was just one of the names that I was kind of attacked.
His brother followed me on. I shouldn't even share this on the show, but humor is fine. His brother followed me on Twitter, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, and I was like, that name sounds familiar, and I just looked it up, and it was like a story about him and Mark as kids playing basketball. I was like, oh, huh, okay. So maybe that means he's interested in something, or maybe I just had tweeted, 6 months earlier, Mark Byington's a great coach, and the guy found, who knows? You don't want to get too lost in that.
Yeah. Well, Curry, it's coming up on 9:30. I know you got a show, so you'll probably be up.
Yeah, we can do a little longer if you got a few. I'm never on time.
Are you I'll just say something that I've been seeing and worries me a little bit. So our one committed recruit for next year is Dante Allen, who is Malik Allen's son. Malik Allen's on the the Miami Heat's bench. He's been an NBA in their franchise for a long time, and now all this it's random tweets I'm seeing, stuff like that. Is there any noise from the NBA circles that you may or may not have anything on of higher level assistants and associate heads?
I talked to someone who knows Malik Allen, or somebody close to Malik Allen, rather, and they were like, Malik's going to Nova, and it was just like the consensus was just like, no, he's not. So Malik Allen will not be your next basketball coach.
Thank you.
I mean,
I love Malik Allen, but not. There's a difference between you hire certain people to get recruits, but
so he's an assistant, so he's not been a head coach. Kyle was an assistant; he's not been a head coach, and they all there's always surprises in search season, but the human nature tendency is to go with the opposite of what you had before, or something approximating it. Mm-hmm. So I expect an older white male, quite candidly.
The same. Literally, that is my expectation.
And and now, like, I don't really know why we're not hearing more about Tony Skinn, who should be in the mix at way more places, who with probably an eighth of the NIL budget of Ryan Odom, lost to him by 3 yesterday, and his team just played insanely hard. If you gave that guy money, who's done a way better job than Kim English did there, but he's a young black guy with not a ton of experience. So I guess, Kyle did have 1 year at Fordham. So, but he's done he came in second at Mason, which is a bad job, and actually tied for first. They were 15-3, and with no money. Money, but no money. So it is funny to me that he's not been thrown around for this. And there's a lot of talk that he was in the mix for Florida State and a bunch of other places. So that, again, like, had he won yesterday, we're probably having a different conversation tonight. You lose by 1 possession, and now, like, Odom is. But I don't have an issue with Odom. I really don't. I just, in general, am more intrigued by candidates who've done it at shittier places. And everywhere Odom's been is a good job relative to its league, right? So, and short stops. Two years at Utah State, 2 years at VCU, 5 years at UMBC. He's good. It's just, I don't know. It's not been at the hardest.
He hasn't been tested
places.
as much as everybody else. Yeah, I get it.
Whereas like Chris Collins on paper, his record doesn't really say much, but it's like one of the worst jobs in the country, and he's quite literally the only person ever there who's made the NCAA tournament.
On the flip side, and the reason I really like Odom is because of exactly that. He's gone to places that he can essentially not plug and play, but come in. There's backing. Utah State loves basketball. VCU loves basketball. UMBC, I'm not even going to go into that one. But there's the backing behind it where he's been able to pick it up and run with it and then do well. And you've seen improvement from year 1 to year 2. Now, to your point, there's also only been 2 years at both of these stops. Like wherever he goes, he's not going to be at VCU in 2, well, maybe I'll say 3 weeks. Maybe they'll make a big Final Four run. But like he won't be there after that period. So it's curious, but that's why I'm interested in him, is because of his ability to take a program that has backing, that has a desire for basketball like us, and find success within 2 seasons. And the hope would be that Villanova's the last stop. That would be the hope.
Okay. Gun to your head, I'm just curious for you guys, like, who are you rooting for to get the job?
I'm Ryan Odom. I am fully Ryan Odom.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that the Bulls finally crack and fire Billy Donovan, and I have the bobblehead here, so I'm rooting for Billy Donovan to make his way back to college.
And Chris?
God, this is hard. I've watched your show for so long that I've kind of taught myself to not get too high on one pick.
Well, and let's be honest, there isn't at Nova, this has been the case from jump. Jay Wright has not had a very successful tree, and
a bad one.
and your job is like really good, but not North Carolina or Duke or Kansas or Kentucky or Texas good, because Texas just has so much money. And so it's an interesting spot because like you're not going to get Dusty May or whatever, he's already got Michigan now. And so, like last year, he was one of those guys. There isn't, other than Will Wade, who you're not going to do for other reasons, there isn't that guy who's 43 to 47, has 20 years in him, and is like clearly the next one, And so all of the names we're talking about are all good with the right resources, can all be very solid. I am wary of Porter Moser. I have to be candid. But most of them are all really solid, and you're going to be better. I think that's fair to say. But which are any of them clear, unambiguous home runs? We'll see.
Yeah,
probably not.
The 2 cop-out answers I have are, you mentioned one, Will Wade. I think Will Wade's the hire of whoever makes that hire is one this year, A+ grade. He to me is the one you put in, you're going to win. I'm very high on Will Wade. There's been a name that has come up a couple times in Grant McCaslin, which I don't get it because I don't know. He seems
that
like
would
a
be
Texas
an amazing
guy.
hire. It feels like totally illogical, but it'd be an amazing hire.
Right, exactly.
As with Byington, listen.
Yeah.
I said it on the show the other night. I've told this story a million times, but there's a high major coach once. I asked him actually about Byington specifically. And I said, is this guy really good? He says, let me explain something to you. If anyone wins 30 games, they're really good. 30 games in a season. And I was like, okay, what is that? It's just a number. But no, it's not. Like if you look this year, 5 guys out of 364 won 5 games. Won 30 games. And so I do actually think like Byington would be a home run now that because he 30 games at Madison, then gets Vanderbilt to a tournament, and they were not the worst tournament team in that league at all. They were pretty good. So I don't know if he'd have interest, but that I think actually would be kind of a home run.
Love that. But like honestly, like the names Collins, Odom, Patino, lesser degree Moser, but
I feel like I haven't heard much of Patino lately. With connected
yeah,
to-
Patino's been it's all been quiet on the Western Front. And Curry, you and I were talking about that a little bit earlier. Like I feel like it's like his weekend, this upcoming weekend is gonna do a lot or not do a lot for him.
Yeah, I mean, if Richard wins 2 games, makes a Sweet 16, and has a couple fun quotes at the press conference, and like, there's a way in which, because I think there's still lingering doubts about, like, oh, it's a Patino, he got a shot because of his name. He's a very different guy than his dad, but Minnesota didn't quite work out, though he was better than the guy who succeeded him. He still needs that like stamp of tournament legitimacy, I think. And there is a way in this business, as we all know, where what happens in a 3-day stretch in the third weekend or fourth weekend of March, whatever it is can completely transform one's fortunes and career. And it's kind of why search season I find so fascinating. By the way, what happens this weekend if Alan Huss at High Point wins 2 games, right? He's got 28 wins, really good name. People think he's terrific, but he hasn't had that national moment yet. Well, all of a sudden, he was an assistant at Creighton. He knows the Big East. If he gets to 30 wins this weekend with a win over Purdue and whoever they're playing, like, don't be shocked to hear that name. So I think there is a lot that can change on the ground in the next several days, and that's why it's a fun time of year.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. All right,
guys.
Yeah. Thank you so much for hopping on, Curry. We appreciate it. This has been fantastic talking search season with you. And I'm sure we'll be on the spaces. You have a space coming on and probably right after this, so we'll let you get going.
I'll tell the folks to stay on Nova if you're on your show. I don't want to take your listeners.
Yeah.
Tap and support Curry's efforts at search season on Venmo. So hit the tip jar.
All right. See you guys. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Curry.
Bye-bye.
That's great. All right, let's get a quick ad, and then we can talk about.
We're not going anywhere, right? We're going to do. We're going to do some talking about.
I mean, eventually we're going places, but
we're just going to do a live ad. Home Field Apparel, homefieldaPparel.com is our sponsor. Use promo code Nova Insider for 15% off. When we talked about it last week, I didn't notice the new bomber jacket that they have.
I texted everybody.
Yeah, you texted, but it was after the fact, I thought. But yeah, so they have the new bomber jacket, the 1990s. So it's the Kerry Kittles Villanova font, Wildcat on the back. So new bomber jacket. They have a bunch of new stuff out. I think they're recognizing that there's a chance for some new fans to come in. So huge, just a great list of items here. The order a size up. Always remember that. Order a size up from Hofield. I just got my Tennessee shirt, and then I was like, it's not the right fit. I got to get a size bigger. So we went a size bigger. But Home Field Apparel, use promo code Nova Insider for 15% off your first purchase. All right, let's get into it. So offline, we were talking about how we want to do this. There are a list of names. I have about 6. We can just kind of talk through some of these and our thoughts and feelings about them. Chris, as the quote unquote guest, do you want to lead us off with whoever you want to talk about first?
I want to talk about Chris Collins.
All right.
That's okay with you guys.
Hit it.
So it came up a lot in the last segment that we did with Curry, Hicks, Sage, and it came up early. And the reason why I want to talk about it is not necessarily he's my favorite, although I would be pretty damn supportive of the hire. It struck me because it made a lot of sense. And so in a search season where I was, and Curry alluded to it, that there's no obvious pick for Villanova, I was looking for a pick that I feel like could tie a lot of things together that we're trying to tie together. Right. And one of them is he's older. He's 50, not super old, right? Like 50 still got some runway on him. Yep. Right. He is, what else has he done? Right. So he's at Northwestern, Big Ten job. Curry alluded to it. not a good job. It's become better as a result of him, but it's like Northwestern's kind of like Drexel with like their weird academic calendar. It's a hard school to get into. They hold schools' feet to the fire to get athletes in the door there. So it's like it's a hard job to win it. And candidly, before he was hired, they had the same level of success as William and Mary in that they made 0 NCAA tournaments from the Big Ten.
They are the last. They were the last Power 5 team, I believe, to get into the tournament.
Yes.
To not make the tournament until he did it.
And then to be winless in the tournament.
And then to be winless, yeah.
Yeah.
Until he did it in 2016, 2017 to get them there, and then 20.
Then the last, not this year, he did not have a great year this year, but the last 2 years before that went and I believe won in each of those tournaments.
Round of 64.
A game. So he was like an 8-9 seed or like whatever in that realm. And so like winning a game is about as much as one would expect there. He hasn't like drastically underperformed seeding expectations or anything like that. But I look at that and I say, okay, like he's swinging. It's like, I don't know. It's like playing with an enormous handicap, right? Like swinging, it's like swinging a baseball bat with like a 60-pound weight on it, right? Like it's hard. And so I look at that and say, this is a guy who knows how to win, who put a roster together that can win in a very, very difficult league. Like in a good league that's got like money and financial support, but as a result of that is a very hard league to win in. And Big Ten has been whether depending on the year, first, second, third best conference each of the last 10 plus years, right? Like they've been really good for a long time. So I found that I like Chris Collins' resume. There's other pieces to the puzzle too. So like talking about on the basketball court stuff is good. Not many places is a coach are we going to hire from where the coach has an easier academic time than he did at the previous institution. And it's going to be a lot easier. Not to say Villanova's a bad school, but over the years with Jay Wright, the relationship with the admissions office got better. Like everything got better and easier to like get guys into the school. So that's another piece of the puzzle. So he doesn't have to deal with some of those weights and focus a little bit more on basketball. Our NIL is much better. We saw that article over the weekend. So like that's all good. And that's going to be true for any guy who we theoretically hire. The other piece of the puzzle that I really like is that he undoubtedly has Philadelphia ties because of his dad. And so he his dad, Doug Collins, like everyone knows that, like 76ers, the whole thing. Philadelphia knowledge is not like I think a lot of people write it off as like, okay, well whatever, right? Like it's not again, it's not my top 7 things, but like it's important, right? Like you can't be totally ignoramus to the Philadelphia ecosystem that you live in. You got to recruit there. You got to do all that stuff. So I think that's helpful. And he also has connections to and knows our institution, like maybe better than some of the other candidates who are being discussed.
He's probably my number 2. We haven't said this. I haven't heard anybody really bring this up. And your feelings aside about him, he was under Coach K for 13 years.
Yeah.
Like that means something. I know the Jay Wright hires haven't like been the greatest, but like he learned from Coach K. He runs a very similar system to what we expect. It's a half-court offense. It's discipline. It's focused on player development. It's always had to be at Northwestern because of how tough it is to get people in there. So he's been able to get them to relative success at times with nothing there. I think to your point, he was swinging a weighted back. He's going to find some success. He's probably my number 2 in the way that like I think that he's the most likely because I think it's the move the school will make. But I wanted to put in like he was under Coach K for 13 years, which is
that's a real coaching tree.
Yeah.
Our A rates for all the success, obviously, and we can talk about this till we're blue in the face. But the Brendan Quinn article, Jay Wright's former assistants in a combined 73 seasons as head coaches have made 1 tournament berth. And it was BU in 2011 or 2010. I can't remember. But Jay Wright's coaching tree is the Charlie Brown Christmas tree. Coach K's is the tree in Rockefeller Center by comparison.
By comparison.
It's not, it's completely different situation we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Jay ran the program and was the dictator that, it worked for him, and he did things his way, and it worked for us for a long time. And just different coaches have different ways of doing things. And I think Coach K, some of these other guys that their trees are always talked about, it's like, okay, they delegated a little bit differently and gave different assistants different opportunities. So the Coach K thing is huge in my opinion. Willie, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. So I mean, look. I think Collins makes a lot of sense. I think personality wise, I think he can fit the school. I don't think he's going to be like, again, these are things that are maybe ancillary to winning, right? But like in terms of things that Villanova would want a guy, they don't want anyone who's going to put them in the news for a bad reason, right? Like we know that about our school, right? Like if you're a fan of Villanova, right? Especially if you went to Villanova, you understand that the institution that you should, right? Like there's a reason why Will Wade's not in the conversation. I think he should be. I think he's the best hire in the entire thing, as I said before, but there's a reason he's not, right? Like, and that's the institution that we know, right? And I hate to say it, and you can be mad about it, but like, if you're going to be a fan of this institution, you're not going to hire, you can't be expecting them to legitimately go out and get Wade. By contrast, I think Collins is never going to put us in the news for a bad situation. I think he's going to be a type of guy who is going to maybe not be like the splashiest name day one, but I think he's going to be the type that like over the course of the summer, you're going to hear a lot of good things come out of, right? Like I think he's steady. I think he's a mature hire. So I think that's like the argument in support of him, just to counter a little bit, but like, it is hard to get past his record, right? Like the record is like
basically 500,
just a little over 500, which we just fired a guy who was just a little bit over 500, but that came with no tournament berths. And in the same period, he's got 2, right? Like, and with 2 wins in that tournament. So obviously that's a step up. And one is Villanova coming off of a Final Four, and the other was Northwestern, right? So I just think that I think that Chris Collins would be a massive step in the right direction. Is he the splashiest name? No, I don't know if it's, I don't think it like moves mountains in like the social media sphere, but yeah.
I don't think there's a perfect answer truly. And if we had the perfect answer, we'd be in the wrong industry. But it's tricky. Like you said, there's some things against him for sure. And I don't know, the more we kind of talk, it almost seems like we've been talking ourselves into him over the past few weeks when it's the change became apparent and people just started throwing names out. Curry's point about the Mark Jackson of it all does make things a little bit interesting. I don't know how that plays out, but and certain guys with their buyouts are interesting too. Like I think UCLA just extended Cronin a couple years ago. I would imagine he has a pretty big buyout. Speaking of guys you don't
do, I've heard something like Collins is in like the 7 to 8 million territory.
Okay.
Mick Cronin is like 16 and goes down to 12 on April 1st or something.
I don't think Villanova's doing it, like unless the school waives it, like, and I don't know how any of that works. So I don't want to get lost in the clouds there, but it just seems like
I think the noise, right, and like take it for what it's worth. The noise is that there might be a world to like Mick Cronin being a guy who they might mutually agree to lower the buyout for, because there's some noise there that like neither party is like particularly thrilled. Like none of them are like, it's not been bad, so they don't have like necessarily a reason to fire them. But like, hey, if the guy had somewhere to go and they could lower the buyout, like maybe everyone gets on board. Like Northwestern's not going to reduce the buyout for Chris Collins, right? Like there's no reason. They don't want to lose him, right? Like he's done well there. They're happy with him. They do not want him to leave, right? So like it depends on the situation a little bit, but like Villanova is going to have to pay a buyout, right? Like, and it's
Yeah.
going to be a lot of money, right? Like, depending on the guy, right? So it's going to have to happen, right? So like, and as far as I'm concerned, let's just use 7 and 10, just to use different numbers, right? Like, that are 3 million's material enough to like care, but like not. But like, if you're looking at a guy who's 7 and you're looking at a guy who's 10, but you feel a lot better about the guy who's 10, one $3 million payment is not the reason to not hire the guy who you're
Yeah,
most
of
excited
course.
by, right? Like, so just point.
That's
putting
my
that point
problem
out there.
though. I don't know if there's a guy that I'm so overwhelmingly excited about that like that's what kind of has me um in a weird situation with the market right now. Like there doesn't really seem to be that perfect name. I feel like last year obviously was a lot better.
Dusty May. And
Yeah, there. I remember like we were talking when he took the Michigan job. We were like, might have just shot ourselves in the foot here by waiting another year. But that's what you have to do, I guess, if you're Villanova at the time. But let's. I feel like we talked enough about Ryan Odom. Is there?
Willie wants to talk about Ryan Odom.
We can save it. We can save it.
Do you actually want to?
I would love to, but we can save it. I'm fine to move on to other people because Odom came up during with Curry, so we can talk about other people.
Yeah, I mean, well, if you have on stones unturned, go for it.
I wouldn't say there's a stone unturned.
Okay.
I just think I'll leave it at this. The way I look at what a home run is, it changes per search season. I think Ryan Odom is the best coach that we can get for what Villanova, like throwing Will Wade aside. That's not going to happen. Ryan Odom is the home run that we can get. He has found success at 3 different programs. UMBC, obviously, like with a run. Then he got Utah State, and Utah State found success immediately. And then VCU is now back in the tournament. You know, if they had lost, they probably wouldn't have been in the tournament. We might be talking about this a little bit differently. But he has found success at basketball programs, has been able to turn things around relatively quickly, roster aside. Ryan Odom has been just he's space and pace, shooting 3-pointers, 5 out, tends to have a pretty decent defense. VCU's number 25, I think, on Ken Palm, around that range. I think Ryan Odom would be able to come in and take whatever our team is, the freshmen that stay, Tyler Perkins, and be able to put together a pretty decent team year 1 and find a lot of success in year 2. To me, I'm putting my irrelevant ass stamp is behind Ryan Odom. Like I think that's the best hire that we can make in this cycle. And a big thing for me, and I'm going to make jokes about it later, but I actually want a youngish coach. And about 50 to 53 is the age that I'm okay with. Because in my head, I want 15 years before you're 65, 66, 67, and thinking about how much longer do I really want to be doing this?
Yeah.
And Ryan Odom's 50. That's where, not that I don't even want him in general, but like a Porter Moser being 60 years old, or even a Billy Donovan being 60 years old.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want an old man coaching. No offense to the 60-year-olds listening to this. You guys are young. I'm not talking about you guys. But that's just where I'm at.
Can I have a hottish take on just the Billy Donovan thing? Which, like, I get it.
I'm joking. I mean,
no, I know you're joking. But I wanted to bring
like I'll
point.
take him.
Yeah, of course. Right, I get it. Right, like Billy Donovan calls you and say, "Hey, you open?" Like, you're not going to say no to that, right? Like,
unless you're Ryan Arcidiacono, you're not saying no.
Just like just like Jay Wright. If he's like, "Hey guys, I want to come back," right? Like, you're not going to say no to that.
Yeah,
right?
That's the 6-year-old I take back. Yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah. But
I do. I think it's washed.
But I do have a hot take. I would be cautious about hiring a coach who left college basketball in one way or another.
Oh yeah.
Pre portal and NIL, or at least like right before it got really big in the last couple of years, right? And then have to have that guy come back, right? Like,
I think that's not a hot take. I think that's an informed and reasonable thing to consider.
Like, I think like Thad Mata has not had like the NIL dollars, and Butler has not had the institutional commitment that they need to have, candidly. But like, he hasn't worked out. Like, it hasn't gone well. And like, part of me thinks like, hey, if you're like an old head, right? Like, who got used to coaching in a particular era where you can like get old and stay old and redshirt guys for a year and hold people's feet to the fire. Like, what are you going to do? Transfer on me? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're going to have a difficult time getting adjusted to the system where people are going to be like, you know what? I'm not fucking playing unless you pay me more. Right? Like I'm out. Right. And we can talk about how that's good or bad for college hoops. We can talk about all that. It's a different conversation, but that's the reality on the ground. And if you can't manage that situation, you're going to be in trouble. Like, you're going to lose and you're not going to get talent. And so I think there's names that are so high up, Jay and Billy Donovan being two of them, right? Like, that you could never say no, and their presence in and of itself would attract people. But I would caution somebody who has not been in college basketball over the last 3 years.
I agree. I don't think that's a hot take. And that's even in my, my joke that I posted earlier today about like my ideal perfect coach. And one of the things I mentioned was good recruiter pre and post NIL. So that's definitely something you have to consider, just somebody being able to manage a team in this day and age.
Before we move on to whoever we're going to nominate and talk about next, Chris, you brought something up where I was like, is there any credence to doing essentially what St. John's has done with Patino of, we're going to bring a coach in who's probably going to be here for 5 years, but he's going to bridge the gap. We're going to be good. And then in 5 years, we'll look at the market and think about a new coach if there's no one that we love. I don't want to do this. Let's be very clear, but I'm just thinking about that being a possibility.
So I would be open to it, but the problem is I don't think there's a guy out there right now that has the same gravitas and status that would be able to do, unless Jay Wright's like, yeah, guys, I'm tired of golfing and doing whatever I want whenever I want. I'd like to come back to the grind.
Give me harder battles.
Is there a guy?
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to like rack my brain.
I don't think there is.
There's not like a guy.
No,
but there are plenty of options, but they're not.
Like, candidly, it's Wade. Will Wade would be the guy who you install, plug in, and he's going to get a ton of recruits. He's going to go all ends of the earth to get them, and you're going to be really freaking good. And then he's going to leave for Kentucky.
I have one idea that I'm getting from a listener right now.
So
it's not necessarily a like the Patino type name, but Yale's head coach is a little bit on the older side. James Jones.
Yeah.
6-time Ivy League champion. I think he's in his mid 60s.
61.
Yeah. His brother is a former Jay Wright assistant, so he is a family member.
Card carrying.
Card carrying Jay Wright.
He's already got his Villanova wild card. Do they still call them wild cards?
Yeah, probably. I don't know why they would. I don't know why you're asking me. I graduated 6 years ago.
But you graduated a lot shorter ago than I did. So
yeah, but I think so. Not to again, different kind of situation where he's not necessarily the name that drags, that brings in talent and talent flocks, and all of a sudden you have like a star-studded celebrity row at your games, but he's somebody that would be a shorter term hire probably, because like you said, we're getting up there. We don't have to talk about Jones right now, but
I got a guy.
Who's that?
Rick Pitino.
No, I don't even want Patino. I'm like kicking myself for giving him this many compliments in one sitting.
Yeah, I've never heard you speak about him like this. You start cursing his name.
It's undeniable that he is like he has recreated his Louisville team from the championship year. Less shooting, but but he was somebody that you worry about everything else later. If you can sell your soul enough to hire him, you worry about everything else later, and that's what St. John's is doing right now.
They have not had a minute of regret.
Oh, I know, and good for them. But again, he's up there, and he's not going to be there forever. I saw something today about him saying, "Oh, I would think about Providence."
What is do we want to bounce into Richard Pitino?
Let's talk Richard.
Yeah, I'm not blown away by him either. I know the Minnesota thing didn't exactly work out for one reason or another. Again, it's almost like you have to categorize previous coaching stops with like the line of pre and post NIL. And and
Yeah.
Minnesota was a pre NIL thing, obviously. But
He did win Big Ten Coach of the Year 1 year there.
yeah.
21 seasons pre-NIL, and then NIL happened, and it kind of started to tank. And then at New Mexico, which New Mexico is a good program for the Mountain West. Like, let's be very clear.
Yes, and
One of
like basketball focused, and
Yeah.
you know,
And over the last 3 seasons, they made the NIT in 22, 23. But last year they had a team that lost in the round of 64 that like a lot of people, myself included, thought could make a run. And then this year it's a similar team that is in the round of 64 facing a Marquette team that like maybe they can beat and make a run. Maybe they just lose in the first round. Who knows? But he's a very talented coach, I believe. There's the bloodlines. And then just in general, like we're thinking about like he's going to be more up-tempo offense and aggressive defense. He's his dad's son. Like even though they're different personality-wise, coaching-wise and team-wise, it tends to be a little bit the same. He hasn't had the defense that Pitino's ever had, but he also hasn't had the chance to get those players. So, or that Rick Pitino's had. I realize I'm talking about Pitino, so I can't just say
yeah.
But at the stop he had at FIU, there was like somewhat of success. Not really. I think it was like a 500 season. Minnesota had a couple of years, which we're talking about another coach, which Minnesota is also
Tough place to win.
kind of a tough place to pull people from. The talent in Minnesota, there's actually a decent amount of basketball talent there.
There's great talent. It just
but
doesn't
they
stay
leave.
home.
Yeah, they leave, and then it's like the barn is hideous, and might be my vote for the worst or like high major arena in sports. And then it's Minnesota, so you're having a tough time pulling people to come all the way up there and like play for them. But I think Pitino, it doesn't feel like to the point where Chris Collins feels just such like a move that we would make. I don't know that we're going to do the Richard Pitino path. I'm not against it. I think he'd be a good hire, and I think getting him East Coast, and obviously, like if Val Ackerman has anything to say about this, like that's an instant, like we have a storyline of all storylines. Big East is in the headlines now because it's Pitino versus.
I can tell you one thing. I really hope they're not running their coaching hire decision by Val Ackerman.
They're not running it by her, but I'm sure I'm sure there's
I know.
something.
Let's put it this way. Maybe to frame it a little differently. Let's say Villanova's like, let's just say Villanova gets down to Collins or Pitino, right? Like that's the decision, right? Like, and they got to make a path and they got to put their weight behind somebody. And let's say like they think Pitino might be the better basketball coach. Collins has less question marks on the maybe like it's not like Richard Pitino, just to be clear, has no like he's not checkered past. There's no checkered past. It's just his dad, right? Like it's his last name Pitino, and all the stuff that comes with that, right? Like so it's not him, but like let's just say the administration could theoretically be loath to want that noise around the program. And maybe there's another notion to this where they think that St. John's is going to go get him after the fact and he's going to jump to that job, right? Like St. John says, we'll do whatever you got at Villanova. We'll match everything. And they're like,
why would he do that?
But if his dad is so positive on it and there's a family thing,
here's the thing.
But hold on. I'm playing out a little bit of a hypothetical.
Yeah.
And so Villanova he is 42 or something, like he's young. He's quite young, even though he's got 15 years of head coaching experience. So like he's a young guy, right? Like whether it's St. John's, whether it's somewhere else, Villanova might fear him jumping, and they don't like that, right? Like historically, they don't like a guy jumping. If it's John's, if it's Kentucky, like they don't like it, right? So they value that loyalty, right? Whereas Collins is 50, it's probably his last stop. Like you get the sense that Pitino would jump again, right? So with that being said, if they're like evaluating this and they're like, well, you know what, these things are about Pitino, like concern me in one way or the other, right? Like a conversation with Val Ackerman might actually be like whisper in Father Peter's ear, and Father Peter trusts her, right? Like could say, hey, I think he could be really good. And I think that would be fun. I think you guys would do well immediately. Like, maybe that does put something over the edge. Now we played out a hypothetical where like that's like a needle mover, and like all the situations play out where it is such, but like that could a little bit of support from the conference, right? Like, or maybe it's more business like, hey, you do this and you're guaranteed a primetime spot on Fox like every Saturday that he plays, right? Like we'll do it, right? Like, so maybe they do throw their weight a little bit around in that regard with a TV deal. Again, we're playing out hypotheticals here, how that could look, etc. But there are worlds where the Patino thing could be a needle mover, where the Big East Conference like does say to Nova, like your call, guys, like whatever, but like we think this would be a lot of fun and we can offer you these things.
I'm sure the conference would love it, but I don't think these are all good points that you make, but I find a hard time to believe they would put any weight at all behind Father Peter's decision. I really don't think he cares if Villanova plays on Peacock or on Fox.
Well, then Eric, right? Like Rodel, like
no, I know. I'm, but that's the thing. We don't even know if it's Eric or Father Peter that's ultimately making that's why Villanova is so weird.
I think there's a world in which New Mexico wins a game. Let's just say they beat Marquette. Mexico wins a game, right? It's a middle ground scenario. They don't win 2, they win a game, right? Rick with St. John's goes on a run, 3 games. Let's just go, they make the Elite 8, right? So they perform to seed line expectations. That the Patino name is hot enough where hiring Richard Patino is actually the fastest portal and everything jump start to the program, right? Like you want to put like instant gas on the car, right? Like in the car to get you moving quickly, right? Like, and you want to build and you want to win now, right? Like other than Wade, he might even be a more like a win now guy than Odom, right? Like if those situations come to pass, if he loses and Shaka beats the crap out of him, like, I don't know. I think we would get pretty quiet pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So just a thought.
Yeah. All right. Want to throw out some other names? Is there anyone else that you all think?
I now that the Iowa job opened up, I think it's more unlikely, but I was, Ben McCollum we talked about early, but I don't think
with Iowa opening.
Yeah. I don't think he leaves. He's at Drake right now. For listeners, people who don't know, he's the Drake head coach right now. He's from Iowa. I don't think if I'm Iowa, I don't let him leave, but leave the state, that is. But so I don't know if that's worth really going into. I don't think there's enough pull for Villanova to be able to make a play on him.
So the other name that we spoke about a lot early and haven't really brought up that much in the most recent times is Mitch Henderson. So Mitch Henderson, head coach of Princeton 2 tournaments ago, made the Sweet 16. NIT team last year, 24-5. He's had, let me just count this out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 20-win seasons at Princeton, with a chance to get another one. I'm sure they're playing in some tournament. They're 19-10 right now. Princeton offense. That's what he does. Solid defensive coach. Usually man to man, but he also throws a matchup zone out there. The Mitch Henderson one is interesting, where as a coach, I think X's and O's, he's phenomenal. He's an absolute phenomenal coach. It will not move the needle, frankly, with recruits, and nationally, it won't move the needle. But do we really care about that if he's able to get and if he's able to use the money he has and the East Coast? Like, I know, yes, Princeton's not, but like he's an East Coast guy. He'll be able to find people from New Jersey, Pennsylvania. He'll get his transfers with the money that we have, and then just win games. Like, if you put Mitch Henderson as the coach of this year's team, we're probably a 7 seed. Like, so there's 3 to 4 wins happening from that POV. So, thoughts on Mitch Henderson?
I was hot on Mitch Henderson for a long time.
I think we all were, to be fair.
And I thought he would be like a really good logical hire, like a great X's and O's guy. He had tournament success. He had the famous win versus Arizona a couple years back. Like, Curry says this all the time. This is the dynamics of March and whatever. But like, this is where one of those things where like a bad year, he had a bad year at a really bad time, but like a bad year at a really bad time, right? Like,
Which I
and
just think is an archaic way of thinking about coaching hiring.
I agree with you.
Here's
Yeah.
the thing.
It's the truth, but
it's like Shaheen Holloway. Like, imagine he didn't leave, went back to St. Peter's, whatever, and had a bad year. Nobody ever hear about him again.
Yeah.
Like that would just be it. I don't know what point
Yeah.
I was trying to make there, but
like, but like the shine is worn off a little bit. And the one thing that does actually scare me, like a real basketball reason, is that he had an NBA guy this year, or at least a pro level guy. This year.
Xavier Lee's an NBA guy.
Right, right.
Maybe a two-way, but he's there. And then
Right.
also they had Tosin Awoma 2 years ago.
Right. They really kind of ran. He like got away from his stuff with Xavier Lee in the lineup. Like I was that like. It's a little bit unfair because at one point you have a pro, right? Like we saw it with Neptune with Eric this year. Like, hey, you got a guy who's going off, like let him cook, right? Like, but it went to the detriment of his team. Like they will beat Rutgers and Newark earlier in the season, and then they just weren't able to hold that up. Like I don't know. I just don't. It did scare me a little bit. I also, there's a lot of out there that like Mitch Henderson wouldn't even want to necessarily leave Princeton. You know, like Nova would seem to be a special situation because he theoretically wouldn't have to move right away. Like he could kind of do the commute for a while before uprooting his family. So like it wouldn't be like a crazy
There's rumors
move.
of Villanova in. Like,
But I would be surprised if Nova went. I don't know. I think just all the names that have been thrown out. I'd be surprised if Nova doesn't pull from like a top 8 league, right? Like it's like, it feels like Ivy, like I don't know if we're going to go for an Ivy League guy or for that matter, just to throw another name in a similar vein, like Matt Langle from Colgate, right? Like who again, another time, a bad year to have a bad year, right? Like, and Langle's got Philadelphia ties, etc. His name was thrown out as a potential candidate for Penn. I don't know where they are at, but like it's just it's a little bit of an awkward time. And like, I do think that if trying to put myself in Eric Rodel's head a little bit on this, I do think that he probably feels a little bit of pressure, not necessarily to win the press conference, but to not hire a program builder and hire a guy who is going to get you closer to win now. So like on the Pitino to Cooley continuum, closer to Pitino than Cooley, right? Like I feel like that's his, I feel like I'm not in his head. I haven't talked about this, but like, I feel like that's probably like running through his mind as he's going through this process is like, this can't be like a 2 to 3, like we can't just go NIT the next 2 years to get where we want to go.
Whoever we hire, I would be conservative and say not this season, but next season there needs to be the tournament. I would love to say this season, but we don't know what the roster looks like. Like that's whatever. But you have 2 years. Not that you have 2 years because you're gonna have more than that. But like after year 2, if there's 2 years of no tournaments, that's where it's gonna be like, what the fuck is going on? that's where it's gonna be like. So I hear your point of there's that you want to ideally you find a coach who's able to put together the 12 guys we get out of the portal, the 8 guys we get out of the portal, whatever the number is with every that, and we're able to make the tournament with that. I hear that. I just is that what Villanova is really going to do? Because if that's the case, go throw the bag at Will Wade and deal with when he leaves in 5 years or 4.
I think there's like a continuum, right? Like I think that's a sliding scale to some degree. Like, look, what I have heard, Curry said it earlier in the show, and I have heard about it, is that like we are like talking about sorry, what was I saying? Like Eric Rodel is it's Eric Rodel's hire to make, right? Like, sorry, that getting to that concept, right? Like Father Peter is probably going to stand down. I would imagine, but he's got to bless it because it's the biggest paid position at the school. Like he's got to bless that hire, right? Like I got Trevor. I caught that late, but it's a good one.
I'm just trying to fill in what Brian would be shouting if he were able to be here tonight.
But the other side to the coin is that he's got to, like, Jay might be lurking out there with input, right? So like wants to manage that a little bit, but like if it truly is Eric Rodal's hire to make, and his pedigree is Oregon, then I think he's going to make a pick that like Oregon would make, right? Like
so then,
in a weird way.
I actually want to use this to bring up a question that was just put in the chat by Justin, which I think is a thing we spoke about offline. He says, am I giving too much credit and thinking we could swing even higher then? Like, and we're talking to, most of our discussion is about trying to find the diamond in the rough or like on the smaller team. Then in this, do we think, like, can we just go swing and go to TJ Oxelberg and be like, yo, like, we will put the money down, TJ, the head coach of Iowa State, 3 seed. Like, do we go to TJ? I'm like throwing out names that I don't really believe in, but like, do you go to Nate Oates? Do you go to these things like, hey, this
Nate
is the
Oates will never
conversation?
coach you.
And I know he'll never coach her. Like, I'm just throwing out names to be like,
I know, but so we can, but again, the big thing is, and I know the USA Today article just like kind of spun it as a positive that, you know, the football thing, but there is so much money at the SEC and the Big Ten schools that I just find it hard to imagine being able to pull a higher tiered established guy from an ACC, a Big Ten, or an SEC school.
The guy who's been talked about is Mick Cronin, right? Like, and can I just say,
the thing, I would throw up.
Mick Cronin objectively would be a great,
objectively a good coach.
A good coach.
Objectively
so a good hire.
He is a good coach.
It would be the worst great hire we could make. I
want
hate every second
to
of
do
it.
with him.
I would be the way I would be on fuck Mick Cronin. Like, it would be like, remember how like that loss to Temple in Kyle Neptune's second game? It was like immediately the groans and like, you know, the anger started to come out. It would be like the first run that the other team made. Yeah. I would be like, this guy, fuck this guy. Like this angry elf motherfucker. I'd be
the first thing that comes up when you Google Mick Cronin is Mick Cronin height. Right? It just doesn't work for me. I'm sorry. There's certain I understand that he wins a lot of basketball games and he's had success in March. He made it to, well, I'm going to put an asterisk on his Final Four because it was a bubble Final Four. You know, like
he's had good teams at UCLA. He's objectively had good teams. At UCLA.
No, I know, but you know, Mickey Mouse Final Four. I don't want anything to do with him.
Yeah, I had to get that shot in, but like the other, I also don't want to deal with Xavier fans every time Mick.
Oh my God.
But okay, to that point, you're going to talk about the Val Ackerman thing. A Dan Hurley, Mick Cronin matchup would be
balled off
would feed families. I mean, it would be Mick Cronin and Dan Hurley going apoplectic on the sidelines, and like they might actually fight. They could actually,
let him get the Providence job in a year and a half. I don't want anything to do with him.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So
it would be funny, but not for. I would love to watch that as a fan of not either of those teams.
So who are the other guys then like would be like home run hits, right? Like Todd Golden at Florida, right?
Which isn't happening.
We would never hire. We could. He wouldn't come.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
like
he wouldn't be offered.
Yeah, he wouldn't be offered, and then also never.
Yeah.
Right. The right, like Nate Oates you mentioned, no chance, right? Like look, Villanova's a top 10 to 15 program by every conceivable metric of all time. And yet the current state of play that we're at, Alabama is like a far worse program.
The coaches just aren't there. Like
their coaches aren't there, but also like we're no one's moving from Alabama in this environment right now to a Big East school. That direction is not going to happen.
You could try, like, I'm just thinking about names that are bigger that have fun. Like, you could try for Brad Brunell at Clemson. He's older, like 56. That could be a decent, but then there's the money from Clemson. Like, that football money, Clemson will just say, like, the next ticket sales is your salary. And he's like, sick.
McCaslin, that came up, like, and I don't know where it came from. There could honestly be some random guy just saying it sometime, and it got repeated enough where people are like, well, I heard this too. Right? Like, McCaslin would be like a guy who could be like a true home run hire. Beard, Villanova would never hire. No fucking chance, right? Like who else? Right? Otzelberger is another name.
Underwood.
Yeah. Like Brad, yeah. Underwood would be good. Like we're not hiring Matt Painter away from Purdue, right? That's the thing. I just don't know like who the person is who's that guy.
Thing. Like I don't know if maybe like a Sam Cassell type, like somebody in the NBA that's been an associate and a lead assistant for years or something like that can coach. Like that's more likely to me than pulling somebody from an SEC or an ACC. Just anywhere with big football. I know we tried to paint the picture in that article that this is a competitive advantage, that we don't have to share any of our percentages with the football teams at IL and all that. We will, because the football players are going to do get NIL at Villanova too. But it's just not comparable how much more resources and money these places have than we do. At the end of the day, we could talk about Villanova's ranking and all time and all the metrics and everything, but we are a small private school in the Northeast. Like it's just
at the number that was thrown out in the article, which was like above $6 million of spend, right? Like, and I think the actual number would pan out to be higher than that because that's like probably a conservative estimate of adding NIL with the revenue share that we would do, like whatever, like, and that NIL is what like Kyle Neptune had at his disposal, and it ostensibly a new hire would bring money guys back into the fold and blah blah blah.
Yeah,
right. Like so, you'd get some juice out of that. But even with that, my understanding is that like let's just say number 7, that would put us probably like in the upper tier of the Big East Conference, but not like clearing the field. Like you're not paying so much more. Like that's not better than St. John's. It's not better than UConn. That's not better than Creighton, right? Like that's not better than Marquette, right? So it might be about the same, but like just staying in our league, like you have to find a way. Like we're not going to hire Hurley away from UConn, right? Like
I was just about to make a joke about that.
Yeah, but like those things aren't going to happen. So I mean, is there a coach in our conference who you'd like swing for the fence or to hire away from? It'd be like Doug McDermott, right? Like it would be that was the only one that I could think of. I would do Shaka Smart before McDermott, but right. I don't think Shaka's leaving. Like these guys aren't leaving. Like McDermott's not leaving.
McDermott's, if anything, is Indiana. Not
Miller's getting rumored to go to Texas, right? Like
yeah.
Sean Miller's not going to no. Like so, it's like it's weird. Like I feel like we have to. I feel like I like the question, so I'm not debating the question because it is a good question. Like, hey, should a top 10 program carry itself as if like I can swing and get this type of guy, right? Like. But I think the reality on the ground is like we're going to need to hire a guy who's going to be a little bit more of a builder type, not fully. Like I feel like you can reload right away and be good and make a run and expect to make a run into the NCAA tournament and win some games pretty early on. But like it's not going to be that guy who's going to be like, oh, like they hired him and he's in the Final Four in year 2, right? Like Like, and if we do, like, great, but like, I don't think that that's the mindset of this hire.
There's 3 other names. One that actually was attached to us of like high major programs. I am not endorsing or even happy to even say these names. Musselman, Jamie Dixon, and then
Musselman.
Steve Peichel.
No.
Yes.
I saw that today with I saw that one today with Malik Allen, and I was like, look, at least I could say I'm a fan of Malik Allen, but
I have no desire for any of those, but they're just, and that's the thing, like the names after you get out are the ones that like will probably say no. Like I think Otzelberger reach out if we haven't reached out, but I'm expecting a swift no. Iowa State's a 3 seed. He seems fine there. After that, like. It's just you're getting into uninspiring names and old retreads and things like that. I think we're just kind of this is the area that we're in.
Yeah, it's weird. Like there aren't if your list was like, oh, I want, national championship winning coaches or runners up or Final Fours. There's only like six or seven coaches that are active right now that have national titles.
Yep.
It's a
And a
very
lot of them are going to
short list.
retire.
I know, that's the thing. Like you're gonna lose Izzo any day, and
Self.
you know he's older, but still, it's like those guys aren't leaving. They're
Few
schools.
is probably on.
Few is like the you know he's not leaving Gonzaga. He didn't leave for it's the Jay Wright thing. He
None
left.
of these
He's
guys are
there
leaving. Like,
forever.
you're not hiring. Yeah.
Nobody's coming to save our day here.
Right. Yeah. So
One,
it's a good thought. Like I agree with it, but there's just no obvious person, right? So like the guy
10 years ago, when before all these guys retired, like yeah, there were more options out there, but it's weird right now.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to think about is because I'd heard the Porter Moser being someone that Jay had interest in, and obviously
Yes.
to the extent that Jay is able to move things on the table, is that something we need to be like thinking that might be more realistic? That if Jay's saying I want Porter Moser, or we should look more into Porter Moser, Father Peter, in terms of blessing, would listen to Jay and just say, like, okay, I trust you on this one. As to where to like between Baker and Kyle, Father Peter knew both of them. I'm assuming Father Peter doesn't know Porter Moser. Maybe he does, but I'm going to make a wild assumption there. What do we think about that?
The Porter Moser thing is the interesting thing, and what I'll call Moser is he's the lowest guy on my list that I'd get behind. Like I'm loath to like not necessarily like not like shoot my shot as who I think the best guy is for the job, because a very important thing that's going to happen in the weeks that follow making the hire is that like it's the one time where I actually think that like it's true. The Villanova fans' reactions to the hire is going to matter a little bit. Mm-hmm. If the noise is like, fuck this, like this is absolute bullshit, Eric Rowe sucks, like this, that, and the other thing, like you're going to set that, it's going to create a bad situation right out the gate. And this guy's got to win a lot in the portal because, again, I said earlier in the program, we have nobody coming back, right? Like to start, right? Like Perkins may be the lone starter.
We have freshmen and red shirts,
right?
And Perkins,
Perkins, right? So like you don't have a starting five in place at the school on April after the Crown tournament's over. So that's not going to happen, right? Like so my point is that I lost my train of thought. Like, my point is that Moser's like the bottom end of the list. Like, and for me, like a lot of the things to like about Moser, and granted, he does have a Final Four run and a Sweet 16 run, which are good, which are assets, right? But like his record at Oklahoma has been okay, right? Like he's not been great, right? Like they made the tournament this year, right? Like there was question on if they were going to do enough to get in, but they did, and they were in a like obscene conference there. So like you could even give him a little bit of a pass for the conference this year. But like, I feel like a lot of the reasons to like Moser are like, well, then just get Collins, right? Like I probably rank Collins above him on my list, right? Like, so like at his high major job, he's done okay, right? Like, and so it's like, I don't know.
How does that change if Oklahoma makes a run? Oklahoma gets to the Sweet 16. How does that change?
If Oklahoma wins 2 games, then I feel like maybe he's got a little bit more juice, right? Like, but I'm worried with a guy like Moser that you hire Moser and like it's been a long time since that Loyola Chicago team and the Sister Jean situation played out, right? Like, and we won the championship that year, and also I got my tickets from going on Loyola Chicago's athletics department website, but it's been a long time since that run. And then he did make the Sweet 16 again. So like kind of repeated it, which showed that he had some, there's some juice there. But like after that, it's kind of been, after in the NIL era, it's kind of been a little bit harder. And so for him, even at a big program that's got a ton of money like Oklahoma, right? Like obviously they're way football first. So like the argument for Moser is kind of like the argument for Shaka Smart at Marquette. Like, the big South southbound
Southern.
SEC or Big 12 type program that like he didn't do a particularly awesome job, did okay, but didn't do a particularly awesome job at. Like it wasn't a good fit for him. And so he comes back. Moser's like from what I understand, like a very much devout practicing Catholic, like, okay, goes to a Catholic institution again, Big East, like that's a better fit for him. And so it's like a Shaka Smarty kind of like argument, like, oh, he's got a mid-major Final Four a long time ago, went to like a program in the South, didn't do so hot, came back to a better fit. And now maybe that's the guy, right? Like, but man, like if you're talking about, if some people are thinking to themselves, I don't want these question marks around a hire and if they can do it, right? Like it feels like Moser's got more question marks than some of the other guys that we're thinking about.
I will say he looks like he could be Billy Donovan's brother.
I'm looking at his conference record. I did not realize it was this bad.
Yeah,
like,
it's horrible
bad.
this year.
Across, like not even just
The overall
at
record?
Oklahoma, but just like across everything.
Oh, okay. Also
Like,
lost to the 2022 Villanova basketball team, right? Didn't we beat Oklahoma? Before
We did.
Justin Moore
We did.
got
Cam
back?
Whitmore. Cam Whitmore came back to play for that game.
Oh snap! Oh yeah, no, never mind. I forgot about that game. Yeah,
Can't hire him.
yeah. Yeah.
Takes him off my list.
It was funny because
That was like after the Portland stuff. Like,
yes, that was the
Yeah.
first game back from Portland from PK85.
yeah, never
And
mind.
the question that they asked him, the halftime reporter asked him at halftime was like, so what do you think about Cam Whitmore? And he's like, oh, he's good. Like, what the fuck? Like, I'm going to try and
This
win a
first game.
basketball game. Yeah.
All right. Well, we are at an hour and a half. Is there anything else? Kind of last words to wrap this up, Chris? Anything you're thinking of, Trev? Just
For me, I just think like obviously we have a couple of weeks with the interim head Mike Nardi before the Crown invite gets ticked off and going. I think like a 2-week break, right? 31st.
yeah,
2
yeah,
weeks,
tweet,
just
yeah.
about, yeah. So this is more scheduling purposes. I don't like if we have news in the next week or so, we'll jump on and communicate all that. Otherwise, we'll be waiting around for the Crown, I guess, and probably gonna have to wait like a week or so for things to shake out in the tournament to see where other coaches land and things like that before Villanova makes a decision. I would think. I don't know.
I'll just hit one question that came up from Sarah in the chat real quick, and then I'll let you guys wrap up here. What do you think is going to happen with any of the current staff? It's a $1 million question, right? Like,
Yeah,
like
we've talked about this a little bit. It's
I
weird in
think
college.
it seems right now like Baker's staying around.
I wouldn't
then-
consider him staff.
Yeah. But then after Baker, it's like, I don't know. Like, if I were a head coach, I'd want to install my guys, right? Like,
I'd go net new.
yeah,
You keep like a couple people to keep like the lights on who know where the switches are, but
maybe like a Dobo or
Yeah.
like or Alicia, even
Yeah,
like
yeah.
someone like that.
Arlisha, I'm expecting like an Arlisha to stay, and maybe like Dope.
I would expect the administration side to be largely untouched. If Sarah more so means like the bench,
I
so
expect them to.
Dwayne Anderson, Mike Nardi, Ashley Howard, and Jamie Young. Like, I don't know. I don't think their contracts are all tied, but a new coach comes in, you expect him to want to either bring, usually, especially from a lower, like a mid-major or something, they want to bring a couple guys with them because that's usually I would imagine a significant pay increase from mid-major to whatever Villanova is paying assistants. So I think one or two typically come with. There hasn't been any indication that we're aware of, at least. But I don't know. I would think it's kind of a clean house situation.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Sorry, I'm like reading like
No, I know
text and
it's
stuff like that.
weird. It's weird because obviously we all grew up with all of these guys.
Yeah.
Either as in Chris's case, some classmates, right? Yeah. Some classmates.
Yeah, I
and
mean, I
then-
crossed paths with Nardi, and I
Yeah.
mean, Dwayne Anderson was my literal classmate, right? Like, so I like a lot of these guys
Yeah.
personally, right? Like,
Again,
like,
it's the same situation. Like they're all in the family, so to speak, and it'll be awkward I'm sure if that's just it, but it's Villanova. That's never just it. So we'll see how things shake out. No indication so far. So
All right. Oh, go ahead. You were about to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say two things. Like go like at Curry Hicks Stage to follow Search Season Spaces. I will continue to find times to do spaces where I can fit them in over the next, course of the next week and a half to try and keep this dialogue going. I appreciate all the pings and DMs, etc. As we're like going, I'm like getting texts like I heard Jay like Porter, like, are you guys talking about that? Right. So like I'm hearing like all this stuff coming around. So like we will see. But I do think though, if we make if we make a shit hire, right? Like, and let them hear it. But like Moser and up, I feel like you almost like it's going to matter how we react to that. So like, I'm thinking to I want this guy to be successful. Like there's arguments for any of the coaches that we mentioned to be successful.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to tell anybody how to fan, but like we really need to do really well in the portal. So like maybe we're excited about it and then we see how year one goes.
It's a fresh start. It's a fresh start and opportunity for no matter what. And like let's take that and run with that.
Yep.
One last, I promise my last thing on a very positive note, a very quick heart monitor. Colin Gillespie started an NBA basketball game tonight. Josh Hart had a triple-double.
Oh, trust me, I know.
And the ultimate heart monitor was that commercial today.
Yeah.
The Timberwolves are tied with 4.6 seconds left. I have it on play-by-play. I'm expecting a Dante game winner, just knowing how the world's going.
Yeah.
Last thing before we drop, the brackets came out. Just give a who's your. We don't even know go Final Four. Just title.
I don't follow any teams except Villanova. So
okay, so Villanova's your pick.
Villanova's going to win the crown. Houston. I don't know.
Chris.
This year feels Dookie.
That's where I'm at. It's Duke.
I would say Duke if I knew Flag was going to be completely healthy.
If Duke is healthy, I'm saying Duke. Yeah. If they're not, I'm going to say Michigan State.
I'm also like super bought in on. I'm like I didn't think I was going to find this way. I thought I was going to be out on them or just kind of like a nice but just whatever run. I'm a little bought in on St. John's right now. I'm a little bought in on St. John's right now. I am. It's me. People know me for a long time. It's me during Big East, during NCAA tournament. I'm all Big East all the time.
Wearing the Rob Lowe Big East hat.
That's right, the Rob Lowe Big East hat. Like I am that guy, but I have talked myself into being in on the Johnnies. They're shooting a little bit better of late. They wear teams down.
Can't shoot worse.
It's Pitino, right? Like I am. Yeah. Kind of the thought that they've got 2 wins in them and they might have 3 or 4. So like, that's not necessarily a title, but like, man, if Pitino makes the Final Four, like, it's not a national championship and he's got a couple of them, but like this might be his magnum opus if he makes the Final Four.
It might be, which is why when they lose in the second round, it's going to be hilarious.
It will be. Given how their fans, some of whom have appeared on this program in the past, have acted on Twitter, it would be hilarious. It would be very hilarious. So,
especially if it's like Calipari that does it to him,
that'd be great.
It would be the most hilarious thing in Providence.
They're definitely making like the Sweet 16. All right. Anyways, all right. Well, this has been fantastic. Chris, have we ever done an episode an hour 40 long? Like, I don't think we've ever gotten that far.
I have. No, I'm pretty sure last year's episode at around this time.
Yes, actually, yeah.
I think that might have been a 2-hour.
Yeah, that was actually it.
I think the episode was titled Ether. And, and that we burnt everything down.
Yeah. Oh, boy, that's fun. All right. Well, as Trevor called out, we will just be monitoring and seeing what happens with the program as we roll forward. But thank you all for joining and listening. And as always, let's go Nova.
Yes!